The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Winnemucca's only hotel, and Katherine Rosewood stepped down into the Nevada dust with her carpetbag clutched tight against her chest, knowing full well that her future husband was already dead and buried 3 weeks past. The telegram had reached her 2 days into her journey from Philadelphia, but she had no money to turn back and no family willing to take her in after what they called her shameful decision to become a mail-order bride. So she had continued west with nothing but stubborn pride and a rapidly dwindling purse, hoping against reason that somehow this frontier town might offer her a chance at survival, even without a husband waiting. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Katherine stood on the wooden sidewalk, her dark blue traveling dress already coated with the fine desert dust that seemed to permeate everything in this harsh landscape. She was 22 years old, tall for a woman at 5 feet 7 inches, with auburn hair she kept pinned beneath a modest bonnet and gray eyes that had learned to hide her fears behind a cool, dignified expression. Philadelphia had taught her that much at least, even if it had taught her little else of practical value for surviving in a place like this. The hotel clerk, a thin man with suspicious eyes, looked her up and down when she approached the desk. "Help you? I need a room, please. Just for a few nights while I sort out my circumstances." His eyes narrowed. "You that bride? The one coming for Harold Meeks?" Katherine felt her stomach tighten but kept her voice steady. "I was engaged to Mr. Meeks through correspondence, yes. I have since learned of his unfortunate passing. Harold died of a heart failure 3 weeks back." The clerk's tone held no sympathy. "Left debts all over town. You got money for a room?" "I have some funds, yes. $3 a week, in advance." It was highway robbery and they both knew it, but Katherine had no leverage to negotiate. She counted out $3 silver from her carefully hoarded money and took the key he slid across the counter. "Room 4, upstairs. Breakfast is extra." She climbed the narrow stairs with as much dignity as she could muster, feeling the clerk's eyes on her back. The room was small and sparse, containing only a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair beneath a dusty window that looked out over the main street. Katherine set down her carpetbag and sat on the edge of the bed, allowing herself exactly 5 minutes to feel the full weight of her situation before she would need to start planning her next move. She had $17 and some change remaining. Winnemucca, Nevada in the spring of 1878 was not a place that offered many opportunities for a single woman of good breeding but no connections and no skills beyond embroidery, piano playing, and the management of a household she did not possess. She could perhaps find work as a seamstress, though her fine needlework was more suited to decorative purposes than the rough mending and practical sewing that would be needed here. A restaurant might need help, though she had never worked in food service, and her cooking skills were adequate at best. The boarding house situation worried her most. $3 a week would drain her remaining funds in just over a month, and that was assuming she ate sparingly and had no other expenses. She needed to find work immediately, and she needed to find somewhere cheaper to live. Katherine stood and unpinned her bonnet, smoothing back the strands of auburn hair that had come loose during the long journey. She washed her face and hands in the tepid water from the pitcher, changed into a fresh shirtwaist, and prepared to go back downstairs to begin asking about employment opportunities. She had not come 2,000 miles to give up now. The main street of Winnemucca stretched out before her in the late afternoon light, a wide dirt thoroughfare lined with false-fronted buildings that promised more grandeur than they delivered. She could see a mercantile, a blacksmith shop, 2 saloons, a bank, a barber shop with a striped pole, and various other establishments that comprised the commercial heart of this high desert town. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the warmth of April. Katherine walked to the mercantile first, reasoning that a general store might need assistance with inventory or perhaps could use someone to help wait on customers. A bell jangled above the door as she entered, and she found herself in a dim space crowded with barrels and shelves and hanging goods of every description. A woman emerged from the back, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair and a weathered face that hardened the moment she saw Katherine. "I am Katherine Rosewood. I've just arrived in town, and I am looking for employment. I wondered if perhaps you might need assistance in your store." The woman's eyes flickered with something Katherine could not quite read. "You are the bride." "I was engaged to Harold Meeks, yes, but he passed before my arrival. I find myself in need of work." "I know what you find yourself in need of." The woman's voice had turned cold. "And I will not have you working in my store, spreading your shame to decent folk." Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I beg your pardon. I have done nothing shameful." "You came here as a mail-order bride to a man you had never met, selling yourself like common goods. That is shame enough. And Harold Meeks was a known gambler and drinker who died owing money to half the town. You chose that man based on whatever lies he told you in his letters, which shows poor judgment at best and loose morals at worst. I had no way of knowing his true character. He presented himself as a respectable businessman. Then you are a fool as well as shameless." The woman pointed to the door. "Get out of my store. I want nothing to do with you." Katherine left without another word, her face burning and her hands trembling with suppressed anger and humiliation. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing deeply and trying to calm herself. She would not cry. She would not give anyone in this town the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She tried the hotel restaurant next, and then the boarding house on the north end of town, and then a dressmaker who worked out of her home. The responses were all variations on the same theme. The story of Harold Meeks' mail-order bride had already spread through Winnemucca's small population, and the collective judgment was clear. She was an outsider. She was associated with a man who had left debts and bad feelings, and she was a woman who had advertised for a husband, which marked her as desperate and morally suspect. By the time the sun began to set, Katherine had been turned away from every establishment she had approached. She returned to her room at the hotel with her head held high but her heart sinking. She had 6 days left on her room, $17 to her name, and no prospects whatsoever. The next morning, she tried again, venturing into the saloons despite knowing that respectable women did not frequent such places. She was desperate enough now that respectability seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. But the saloon owners had no interest in hiring her either. One told her bluntly that she was too refined for the work and would not last a day. Another suggested she might work upstairs as a percentage girl, an insult so crude that Katherine left before he could finish explaining the arrangement. She was standing on the sidewalk outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, trying to decide what to do next, when she heard a voice behind her. "Miss Rosewood." She turned to find a man regarding her with curiosity rather than judgment, which was novel enough to make her pause. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy: worn denim pants, a faded shirt, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that he removed as he addressed her. His face was handsome in a rough, weathered way, with blue eyes that seemed kind. "Yes," Katherine said cautiously. "Yates Weston. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town. I heard you were looking for work." You heard correctly, Mr. Weston. Though I am beginning to think my search is futile. It seems my reputation preceded me, and the town has decided I am not fit to employ. Yates Weston studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Seems to me a woman who travels 2,000 miles on faith is showing considerable courage, not shame. This town can be quick to judge and slow to forgive, especially where Harold Meeks is concerned. He wronged a lot of folks before he died. I am not Harold Meeks. No, you are not. But you are convenient to blame, being his intended and being here when he is not. Yates put his hat back on and adjusted it. I was not friends with Harold, and I do not hold his debts against you. I do, however, need help at my ranch. I have been running the place alone since my hired man quit last month to try his luck at the silver mines. I need someone who can cook, keep the house, and help with the lighter ranch work. The pay would be $30 a month plus room and board. It is hard work and the ranch is isolated, but it is honest employment if you want it. Katherine felt a surge of hope so strong it almost made her dizzy. You would hire me, even knowing what the town thinks. I make my own judgments, Miss Rosewood, and I do not give a damn what the town thinks. He said it loudly enough that several people on the street turned to look. The offer stands if you want it. You can come out today and see the place before you decide. I accept. Katherine did not hesitate. I will need to collect my things from the hotel. I will wait here. She hurried upstairs, packed her few belongings back into the carpet bag, and settled her account with the clerk, who did not bother to hide his smirk when she checked out after only one night. She did not care. She had employment and shelter, which was more than she had dared hope for an hour ago. Yates Weston was waiting beside a bugboard wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. He took her carpet bag and helped her up onto the seat with an old-fashioned courtesy that surprised her. Then he climbed up beside her and clicked to the horses, and they rolled out of Winnemucca heading north into the desert. I should explain the situation before we get there, Yates said once they were clear of town. The ranch is small by territory standards. I run about 200 head of cattle and have 40 acres of decent grazing land near a creek that runs year-round. The house is solid but plain. 2 bedrooms, a main room with the kitchen and sitting area, and a root cellar. I built most of it myself 3 years ago when I bought the land. You would have your own bedroom with a door that locks. I want to be clear about that. This is employment, Miss Rosewood, not anything improper. Katherine felt her cheeks warm but appreciated his directness. I understand, Mr. Weston, and I appreciate your clarity on the matter. I rise early and work until sunset most days. I will need breakfast before dawn, a midday meal that can be simple, and supper in the evening. The house has not been properly kept in months, so there will be considerable cleaning to do initially. I also have a vegetable garden that needs tending and chickens that need feeding. Can you handle chickens? I have never personally handled chickens, but I am willing to learn. Fair enough. I will teach you what you need to know. He glanced at her sideways. Can you cook? Adequately. I am not a professional cook, but I can prepare basic meals. That is more than I have been doing for myself. I have been living on salt pork and beans for weeks. He grinned suddenly, and it transformed his weathered face into something younger and more open. Anything you cook will be an improvement. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, and Katherine felt her first moment of doubt. The house was indeed solid, a low structure of wood and stone that seemed to grow out of the landscape, but it was small and isolated in a way that made her Philadelphia upbringing seem impossibly distant. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and endless empty space in every direction. The mountains loomed closer here, purple and gray against the blue sky, and the silence was profound. "It is very isolated," she said quietly. "Yes, that bothers some people. Does it bother you?" Katherine considered the question honestly. "I do not know yet. But I do know that isolation is preferable to hostility, and Winnemucca has made its hostility quite clear." "That is a fair point." Yates drove the wagon up to the house and set the brake. "Come on, I will show you around." The house was indeed plain but well built. The main room had a stone fireplace, a cook stove, a rough-hewn table with benches, and a few chairs arranged near the hearth. One bedroom opened off to the left, small but private, with a single bed and a trunk. The other bedroom, clearly Yates's own, was on the opposite side. Everything was dusty and cluttered with the bachelor disorder of a man who had more important things to do than housekeeping. "It needs work," Yates admitted, "but it is sound. The roof does not leak and the stove draws well. There is a well outside with good water, and the creek is just beyond that rise if you need to do washing. I keep a rifle over the door and a pistol in the kitchen, but we have not had trouble with raiders or Indians in over a year. Mostly, you would need to watch for snakes and the occasional coyote." Katherine set down her carpetbag and looked around the space that would be her new home. It was rough and simple and utterly foreign to everything she had known, but it was shelter and it was employment, and it was being offered without judgment. "When would you like me to start?" she asked. "You already have. Welcome to the Weston Ranch, Miss Rosewood." The first days were harder than Katherine had anticipated. She woke before dawn to find Yates already up and feeding the horses, and she stumbled through making coffee and frying eggs and bacon while her eyes were still heavy with sleep. She learned to feed the chickens without panicking when they flocked around her feet, and she learned to draw water from the well without splashing half of it on her skirt. She swept and scrubbed and organized, transforming the dusty chaos of the house into something cleaner and more habitable. Yates was out most of every day, riding the range to check on cattle and mend fences, and do the 100 other tasks that running a ranch required. He came in for the midday meal she prepared, usually something simple like bread and cheese and cold meat, and then disappeared again until sunset. At supper, they sat across from each other at the rough table, and he told her about his day in his quiet, deliberate way, and she told him about the progress she had made on the house. They were cautious with each other in those first days, like two wild animals circling and trying to determine if the other was a threat. But gradually, as the days turned into a week and then 2 weeks, they began to relax into an easier rhythm. Katherine learned that Yates had come west from Missouri 5 years ago, seeking land and opportunity that the increasingly crowded East could not provide. He had worked as a ranch hand for 3 years, saving every penny, before buying this land and starting his own small operation. He had no family left. His parents had died of influenza and his only brother had been killed in the war. The ranch was everything to him, his entire world and purpose. "Why did you never marry?" Katherine asked one evening as they sat by the fire after supper. It was late May now, but the desert nights were still cool enough to make the flames welcome. Yates was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Never seemed like the right time. Building this place took everything I had. Did not seem fair to ask a woman to share that kind of hardship. And I guess I am particular. I wanted someone who could see past the rough surface to what I am trying to build here, someone who would not be ashamed of a small ranch and a modest life. There is no shame in honest work and a home you built with your own hands. You say that now. But you came from Philadelphia, from society and refinement. This must seem terribly crude to you." Katherine looked around the small house, at the rough furniture and the plain walls and the simple hearth. "I came from a society that valued appearance over substance and judged worth by bank accounts and bloodlines. I came from a family that disowned me for choosing my own path rather than accepting the future they planned for me. I came from a world of parlors and visiting cards and endless pretense. She met his eyes across the fire. This may be crude by Philadelphia standards, but it is honest, and I will take honest crudeness over false refinement any day. Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that had not been there before. You are not what I expected when I heard about the mail-order bride stranded in town. What did you expect? Someone more fragile, I guess. Someone who would wilt under hardship. But you have spine, Miss Rosewood. You have met every challenge I have thrown at you without complaint. I complain in private, Katherine said with a small smile. My feet have blisters and my hands are rough, and I am tired in ways I never knew possible. But I am also eating regularly and sleeping safely and working toward something that matters. That is more than I had in Winnemucca, and far more than I would have had if I had stayed in Philadelphia. They talked long into the evening, the conversation flowing more easily than it ever had before. Katherine found herself telling him about her childhood, about the suffocating expectations of her social class, and the disappointment she had been to parents who wanted a decorative daughter, rather than one who read philosophy and questioned convention. She told him about the scandal when she had rejected the match they had arranged for her with an older man of good family and dubious character, and the cold fury with which they had cast her out. I saw the advertisement for mail-order brides in a newspaper, she admitted. It seemed like an escape, a chance to start fresh somewhere new. Harold Meeks wrote such lovely letters about his mercantile business and his standing in the community. He made Winnemucca sound like a place of opportunity and progress. I think I knew the letters were too polished, too perfect, but I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them. He was a con man and a gambler who ran the most run-down shop in town, Yates said quietly. He owed money to everyone and drank away what little he earned. You would have been miserable with him. I know that now, but I did not know it when I bought the train ticket and left everything behind. She stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. The day I got the telegram about his death, I was 2 days from Winnemucca. My first thought was relief. Is that terrible? A man had died and my first emotion was relief that I would not have to marry him. That is honest, not terrible. My second thought was panic because I had no money to turn back and nowhere to go if I did, so I kept coming, not knowing what I would find or how I would survive. She looked at him then. And then you offered me work, even though the whole town had already decided I was not worth helping. Why did you do that, Mr. Weston? You knew nothing about me except that I was desperate. Yates was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, I know what it is like to be judged unfairly. When I first came to Winnemucca, I was just another drifter looking for work. People assumed I would be like all the others who passed through, unreliable and temporary. It took 3 years of steady work before anyone would take me seriously. Even when I bought this land, people said I would fail within a year, said the land was too poor and the water too scarce, and I did not have enough capital to make it work. But you did make it work. Yes. But only because a few people gave me chances when they did not have to. A rancher named Tom Sullivan hired me when I first arrived and taught me everything about running cattle in this desert country. The banker, Samuel Wright, gave me a loan for this land when everyone else said it was a bad risk. I would not be here without people who looked past assumptions and gave me an opportunity. He met her eyes. So when I heard about you being turned away all over town, judged for circumstances beyond your control, I figured I owed it to the memory of those who helped me to do the same for you. That is very kind. It is also practical. I needed help and you needed work. We both benefit. But Katherine suspected there was more to it than mere practicality. She had seen the way his expression hardened when he talked about the town's treatment of her, the protective anger that flickered in his blue eyes. She had noticed how careful he was to be respectful of her privacy and her dignity, maintaining clear boundaries even as they lived under the same roof. He was a good man, she realized, in the way that mattered most. Not perfect, not polished, but fundamentally decent. The realization unsettled her. She had not come west looking for love or romance. She had been prepared to marry Harold Meeks as a practical arrangement, trading housekeeping and companionship for security and stability. The idea that she might actually develop feelings for her employer had not occurred to her, and now that the possibility had presented itself, she did not know what to do with it, so she did nothing. She continued her work, keeping the house and cooking the meals and tending the garden and chickens. She learned to make bread that did not turn into bricks and stew that had actual flavor. She patched Yates's shirts and mended his socks and organized his chaotic collection of tools and tack. She turned the small house into a home, adding curtains to the windows and wildflowers to the table and a sense of order to the daily chaos. And slowly, carefully, she and Yates became friends. In early June, they needed to go into Winnemucca for supplies. Katherine had been at the ranch for 6 weeks and had not left the property since the day Yates hired her. She was not eager to face the town again, but they needed flour and sugar and various other goods that could not be produced on the ranch. "You can stay here if you prefer," Yates offered as they prepared to leave. "I can handle the purchasing." Katherine tied her bonnet firmly and lifted her chin. "I will not hide as though I have something to be ashamed of. I will go with you." They rode into town in the buckboard wagon, sitting side by side on the bench seat. It was Saturday morning, and Winnemucca was busy with weekend commerce. People were coming and going from the stores, and children played in the street while their parents conducted business. The moment Katherine and Yates appeared, the activity seemed to pause. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. A woman pulled her child closer as they passed, as though Katherine carried some contagious moral disease. Yates drove straight to the mercantile and set the brake. He came around to help Katherine down, offering his hand with deliberate gallantry. Then he placed her hand on his arm and walked with her toward the store entrance, his stride measured and his expression daring anyone to comment. The store owner, a heavy-set man named Douglas Chen, who had never directly refused Katherine but had made it clear through his wife that she was unwelcome, froze when he saw them enter. "Yates," he said uncertainly. "Douglas, I have a list of supplies I need." Yates pulled out a paper and set it on the counter, his hand still keeping Katherine's anchored on his arm. "Miss Rosewood is keeping house for me at the ranch. She will be coming into town regularly for provisions. I expect her to be treated with the same courtesy you show any customer." The store owner's eyes darted between them, clearly calculating. Yates was a steady customer who always paid his bills, not an insignificant consideration in a town where many ran tabs they never settled. "Of course. No problem, Yates." He picked up the list and began gathering items, his discomfort obvious but his mercenary instincts strong. They visited 4 other businesses that morning, and at each one Yates made the same quiet but unmistakable statement. Katherine worked for him. He expected her to be treated well. Anyone who had a problem with that could take it up with him directly. No one took him up on the offer. Yates Weston was well liked in Winnemucca, a man who minded his own business but helped his neighbors when needed. He was also 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered from ranch work, and had a reputation for fairness but not for suffering fools. The town might gossip about Katherine, but they would not insult her to Yates's face. As they loaded the last of the supplies into the wagon, A woman approached. She was perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair and a face lined by sun and wind. Katherine recognized her as Mrs. Sarah Pickering, the woman who owned the boarding house where Katherine had been turned away. "Mr. Weston," Mrs. Pickering said. "Might I have a word, Mrs. Pickering?" Yates's tone was polite but cool. The older woman's eyes moved to Katherine, and to her surprise, there was no hostility in them. "Miss Rosewood, I wish to apologize for my rudeness when you came to me seeking work. I allowed gossip and association to cloud my judgment. That was wrong of me." Katherine stared at her, too shocked to respond immediately. "I have been watching you this morning," Mrs. Pickering continued. "I see a young woman who holds her head high despite poor treatment. I see someone who is working honestly and asking nothing more than basic civility. That takes courage." She turned back to Yates. "You were right to help her, and the rest of us were wrong to turn her away. I hope she knows she has at least one ally in town now should she need one." "Thank you, Mrs. Pickering," Katherine managed. "That is very kind." The older woman nodded and walked away, leaving Katherine and Yates standing by the wagon. "Well," Yates said after a moment, "that was unexpected. Will others follow her example? Maybe. Sarah Pickering is respected. If she has decided you are worth defending, others might reconsider their positions." He helped her up onto the wagon seat. "But even if they do not, you still have a place at the ranch for as long as you want it." As they drove back toward the ranch, Katherine felt something warm and certain settle in her chest. It was more than gratitude, though she was certainly grateful. It was the recognition that this man beside her, this quiet cowboy who had defended her without hesitation, was someone she could trust in ways she had never trusted anyone before. Summer settled over the high desert with its fierce heat and brilliant skies. Katherine adapted to the rhythm of ranch life, learning to read weather patterns and animal behavior. She helped Yates with the cattle when he needed an extra pair of hands, learning to ride well enough to be useful even if she would never match his easy competence in the saddle. They worked together through the long June days, repairing fence line and clearing irrigation ditches, and 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. Katherine discovered muscles she had not known she possessed and developed calluses on her hands that would have horrified her mother. She also discovered that she was stronger than she had believed, capable of more than embroidery and polite conversation. The garden she tended flourished, providing fresh vegetables that supplemented their diet of beef and beans. The chickens produced eggs reliably, and she learned to bake in the temperamental oven until her bread was actually good rather than merely edible. The house stayed clean and organized, transformed from a bachelor's neglected shelter into a genuine home. And through it all, Katherine felt herself falling in love with Yates Weston. It happened gradually, in small moments that accumulated like gold dust in a pan. The way he always thanked her for meals, no matter how simple. The way he taught her new skills with patience and humor, never making her feel foolish for her ignorance. The way he told her stories about the land and the animals and the vast sky above them, sharing his knowledge like precious gifts. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, his blue eyes soft with something that might have been longing. By July, the tension between them had become almost unbearable. They were constantly aware of each other, moving through the small house like dancers in a careful choreography designed to maintain proper distance. They touched only when necessary, the briefest contact of hands when passing a dish or steadying a ladder sending electricity through Katherine's skin. She knew Yates felt it too. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened when she brushed past him in the narrow kitchen. She heard it in the slight roughness of his voice when he said her name. She sensed it in the way he stayed outside longer than necessary some evenings, as though he needed the space and the darkness to compose himself before facing her across the supper table. They could not continue this way. Something had to change. The moment came on a hot afternoon in late July. Katherine was in the garden, picking vegetables for the evening meal. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down her back beneath her simple cotton dress. She had long since abandoned the corsets and layers of her Philadelphia wardrobe in favor of practical clothing suited to the desert heat. Yates rode up from checking the south pasture, dismounted, and led his horse to the water trough. He removed his hat and dumped a dipper of water over his own head, shaking the moisture from his hair like a dog. Then he saw Katherine in the garden and walked over. "Hot enough for you?" he asked with a grin. "I believe I am melting," Katherine replied. "I think there may be a puddle where I am standing. The creek is running cool if you want to go wade in it. I can finish the garden." "That sounds like heaven." Katherine walked down to the creek, which ran clear and cold from the mountains. She removed her shoes and stockings, hiked her skirt above her knees, and stepped into the water with a sigh of pure relief. The current was gentle here, barely moving, and the creek was only a foot deep. She waded out to the middle and stood there, letting the water cool her overheated skin. She did not hear Yates approach until he spoke from the bank. "Mind if I join you?" She turned to find him barefoot, his own pants rolled to his knees. "It is your creek." He waded in and stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his sun-warmed skin, even through the cool water. For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the water ripple around their feet. "Katherine," he said finally, and the way he said her name, just her first name without the formal Miss Rosewood, made her heart skip. "I need to say something, and I do not want you to feel obligated in any way. You work for me and you depend on me for your livelihood, and I do not want to take advantage of that position." "You could never take advantage," she said softly. "Let me finish." He turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. "These past months with you here have been the best of my life. Not because the house is cleaner or the food is better, though both those things are true, but because you are here. Because I wake up knowing I will see you at breakfast, and I come in for dinner looking forward to talking with you, and I sit by the fire at night listening to your voice and thinking how lucky I am that you walked into that saloon looking for work." Katherine's breath caught. "Yates." "I am in love with you," he said simply. "I think I have been since that first day when you stood on the sidewalk with your chin up and your eyes fierce, refusing to be ashamed of circumstances you could not control. And I know this complicates everything, and if you do not feel the same way, we will never speak of it again, and nothing will change between us. But I had to tell you. I could not keep pretending I feel nothing more than employer to employee, friend to friend." "You foolish man," Katherine said, her voice breaking. "I have been in love with you since the night you told me there was no shame in choosing my own path. Since the morning you walked beside me in town and dared everyone to judge. Since the 100 moments in between when you showed me what it means to be respected and valued for who I am rather than what I can pretend to be." Yates stared at her. "You love me." "Yes, you impossible, wonderful man, I love you." He kissed her then, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her want to weep. The kiss was everything Katherine had imagined, and nothing she could have anticipated. A perfect collision of longing and relief and joy. She kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past months, all the hope and fear and desperate affection she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Katherine." Not as a practical arrangement or a mail order contract, but because I love you and I want to spend every day of the rest of my life with you. Marry me and make this ranch truly ours. Marry me and let me give you the home and the partnership you deserve." "Yes," Katherine said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They kissed again, standing in the cool creek with the hot sun beating down and the mountains watching from the distance. And Katherine thought that she had traveled 2,000 miles seeking escape and survival, but she had found so much more. She had found a home, a purpose, and a love that made every hardship worthwhile. They were married 3 weeks later in Winnemucca, in a small ceremony at the church with Sarah Pickering and her husband standing as witnesses. The town's attitude toward Katherine had softened considerably over the summer months. Seeing Yates's obvious devotion and Katherine's quiet dignity had gradually changed opinions, and while not everyone welcomed her warmly, most had at least stopped treating her as a pariah. Katherine wore a simple dress of pale blue cotton that she had sewn herself, and Yates wore his best shirt and a new vest he had purchased for the occasion. The minister, a circuit preacher named Reverend Thomas, performed the ceremony with solemn grace, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Katherine with such tender joy that several of the few guests in attendance wiped away tears. The reception was small, held in the church's meeting room, with cake and coffee provided by Sarah Pickering and a few other women who had decided to extend the olive branch. It was nothing like the grand Philadelphia wedding Katherine's parents had once planned for her, with its hundreds of guests and elaborate reception and costly gown. But it was infinitely more meaningful because it was real and it was hers. Samuel Wright, the banker who had given Yates his first loan, approached them as they prepared to leave. "Congratulations, Yates, and welcome to Winnemucca, Mrs. Weston." Mrs. Weston. Katherine felt a thrill at hearing her new name spoken aloud. "If you need anything as you two build your life together, you know where to find me," Samuel continued. "Yates, you are one of the hardest working men I know, and Mrs. Weston, you have proven yourself to be made of stern stuff. I think you will do well together." "Thank you, Mr. Wright," Katherine said. "Your good opinion means a great deal." They drove back to the ranch in the golden light of evening, Katherine sitting close beside Yates on the wagon seat, her hand in his. The simple gold band he had placed on her finger caught the light, a symbol of promises made and a future shared. "Happy?" Yates asked as the ranch came into view. "Happier than I have ever been," Katherine replied honestly. "I feel as though I have been searching my whole life for you, for a place where I truly belong." "You belong with me," Yates said firmly. "Always." That night, as they lay together in the bed that was now truly theirs, Yates held Katherine close and traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy," he admitted quietly. "I thought the ranch would be enough, that building something with my own hands would be all the satisfaction I needed. But having you here, sharing this life with me, it is more than I ever imagined." "I feel the same," Katherine said, turning to face him in the darkness. "I came west expecting duty and survival. I found love and home instead." "What do you think your parents would say if they could see you now?" Katherine considered the question. "I think they would be horrified." Their daughter married to a cowboy, living in a rough ranch house in the Nevada desert, working with her hands and sunburnt and content. "It is everything they feared would happen if I insisted on independence." "Does that bother you?" "No, because they were wrong about everything that mattered. They thought appearances and social position were what brought happiness. They thought a loveless marriage to a wealthy man was preferable to honest work and self-respect. They could not understand that I would rather build something real with someone I love than live in comfortable pretense." She kissed him softly. "I have no regrets, Yates. Not one." They made love again, slowly and tenderly, learning the geography of each other's bodies and the rhythms of shared pleasure. Afterwards, Katherine lay awake listening to Yates's deep, even breathing and feeling a contentment so profound. It seemed almost impossible that a year ago she had been miserable in Philadelphia, trapped in a life that was slowly suffocating her. The months after their marriage fell into a pattern of work and companionship and quiet joy. Katherine discovered she was pregnant in late October, and the news filled them both with excitement and a touch of trepidation. They were isolated at the ranch, miles from town and from medical help should anything go wrong. "We will manage," Yates assured her, though she could see the worry in his eyes. "Sarah Pickering has delivered half the babies in Winnemucca. She will help when the time comes." Katherine worked as long as she was able, only stopping the heaviest tasks as her pregnancy advanced. She prepared the second bedroom for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets by the fire while Yates carved a cradle from pine wood. They talked about names and wondered whether they would have a son or daughter and planned for the future. Winter came to the high desert, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. The work was harder in the cold, but they managed together, caring for the cattle and horses and keeping the house warm. Katherine read aloud to Yates in the evenings, books she had brought from Philadelphia and new ones they occasionally purchased in town. He listened with the focused attention he gave to everything, asking questions and sharing his own insights. "You should have been a teacher," he said one night after she finished reading from a book of philosophy. "Why do you say that?" "Because you make complicated ideas clear and interesting, and you have patience with people who are learning." "I never thought of teaching. That profession was not considered appropriate for women of my class." "Your class was foolish then," Yates said bluntly. "You have a good mind and a gift for explaining things. That should be valued, not hidden away because of nonsense about what is proper for ladies." Katherine smiled, struck once again by how much her husband's respect for her abilities meant. Harold Meeks, in his letters, had written flowery compliments about her beauty and grace. Yates simply treated her as an equal partner in building their life, someone whose thoughts and skills mattered as much as his own. Their son was born in late March of 1879, delivered with Sarah Pickering's capable assistance, and Yates pacing anxiously outside until the first cry announced a healthy baby. They named him Thomas, after the circuit preacher who had married them, and Yates held his son with such wonder and tenderness that Katherine fell in love with him all over again. "He is perfect," Yates whispered, his finger tracing the baby's tiny hand. "Thank you, Katherine. Thank you for this gift. We made him together," Katherine replied, exhausted but happier than she had thought possible. "He is ours." Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Katherine adjusted to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to learning ranch work, and Yates was a devoted father who took over cooking and cleaning without complaint, so she could rest and nurse the baby. The town's attitude toward Katherine had completed its transformation during her pregnancy. Seeing her and Yates so clearly devoted to each other, watching them build a marriage based on genuine love and respect, had gradually won over even the most skeptical residents. By the time Thomas was born, Katherine was accepted as simply Mrs. Yates Weston, the capable wife of a hard-working rancher, rather than the scandalous mail-order bride who had arrived in shame. Life settled into a new rhythm that included the demands of caring for an infant alongside the perpetual work of the ranch. Katherine sometimes marveled at how far she had come from the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stage coach barely a year before. She was stronger now, both physically and emotionally. She could ride well, shoot adequately, tend a sick calf, and manage a household under conditions that would have seemed impossible to her former self. But more than the practical skills, she had found something she had been searching for without knowing it. She had found a place where she belonged, work that mattered, and a love that sustained her through every difficulty. One evening in late summer, when Thomas was 4 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Katherine and Yates sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the distant mountains. The air was cooling after the heat of the day, and the vast sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. "Do you ever think about Philadelphia?" Yates asked. "Do you miss it?" Katherine considered the question honestly. "I miss my sister sometimes. We were close before my parents turned her against me. I hope someday she will reach out that we can rebuild that connection. But Philadelphia itself, the society, the expectations, the endless pretense? No, I do not miss any of that. Would you ever want to go back, even for a visit? Perhaps someday, when Thomas is older, we could travel east so he can see where I came from. But this is home now, Yates. This ranch, this life, this family we are building together. Everything that matters is right here." Yates reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I was thinking today about that morning when I found you outside the saloon. You looked so fierce and determined, refusing to give up even when everything seemed hopeless." "I felt hopeless," Katherine admitted, "but I was too stubborn to quit. It was more than stubborn. It was brave." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "You left everything you knew and traveled across the country on faith. When that faith proved misplaced, you did not crumble. When the town turned its back on you, you held your head high. And when I offered you a job that meant isolation and hard work, you accepted without hesitation. That takes courage, Katherine, or desperation. No, I have seen desperate people. They take the easiest path, not the hardest one. You chose dignity over comfort, honest work over charity, and independence over security. Those were brave choices." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for seeing that. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove it. I did not give you anything. You earned everything you have through your own efforts. I just had the good sense to recognize quality when I saw it." He grinned suddenly. "And the incredible luck that you accepted my offer rather than telling me to go to hell." "I very nearly did tell you to go to hell," Katherine laughed. "You were this strange cowboy offering work to a woman you did not know, and I had no idea if you were trustworthy, or if I was walking into a worse situation than I already faced. What changed your mind, your eyes? I looked into your eyes and saw kindness and honesty. I saw someone who meant what he said and would keep his word." She squeezed his hand. "I trusted my instinct, and my instinct was right." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. From inside the house came the soft sounds of Thomas stirring, and Katherine rose to tend to him. Yates followed her inside, banking the fire and lighting the lamps while she nursed their son. This was their life now, Katherine thought as she watched Yates moving around the small house with easy familiarity. Simple and hard and infinitely precious. This was what she had been seeking without knowing it when she stepped on that train in Philadelphia. Not escape, but belonging. Not survival, but purpose. Not security, but love. The years rolled forward like the seasons, each bringing its own challenges and joys. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing slowly but steadily. They added more cattle, improved the irrigation system, and built a larger barn. Katherine kept meticulous records of expenses and income, her Philadelphia education proving useful after all in ways her parents had never intended. Thomas grew into a sturdy, bright child who followed his father everywhere and peppered his mother with endless questions. In 1881, Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after the woman who had been the first to change her mind about the shamed mail-order bride. And in 1883, another son arrived, this one named James after no one in particular, but simply because they both liked the name. The ranch house had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Yates built an additional room with Katherine's input on the design. She insisted on windows that would let in light and a floor that could be properly cleaned, and he teased her about her insistence on civilization, even in the wilderness. Winnemucca grew too, evolving from a rough frontier town into a more established community. A school opened, and when Thomas turned 6, Katherine began taking him to town twice a week for lessons. She sometimes stayed to help the overwhelmed teacher, finding that Yates had been right years ago when he suggested she had a gift for teaching. Sarah Pickering became a close friend, and Katherine found herself part of a network of women who supported each other through the challenges of life in the high desert. She hosted quilting bees at the ranch and attended church socials in town, no longer an outsider but a respected member of the community. But through all the changes and growth, the center of Katherine's life remained Yates. Their love had deepened with the years, weathering difficulties and celebrating triumphs together. They still sat together in the evenings after the children were in bed, talking about their days and their plans and their dreams. They still touched each other with the wonder of those early days when every contact was electric. They still looked at each other across the breakfast table and felt grateful for the chance encounter that had brought them together. In the spring of 1885, 7 years after Katherine had arrived in Winnemucca, a letter came from Philadelphia. It was from her sister, Margaret, written in the familiar handwriting that Katherine had not seen in all those years. "My dearest Katherine," the letter began. "I hope this letter reaches you, as I am not entirely certain of your exact location, but have heard through indirect channels that you married a rancher and settled near Winnemucca, Nevada. I should have written years ago, and my shame at waiting so long is profound. I want you to know that I never truly turned against you, though I allowed our parents to believe I had. I was young and frightened and did not have your courage to stand up for what I believed was right. I have regretted my cowardice every day since you left. Our parents have both passed, Mother 2 years ago and Father this past winter. In dying, Father expressed regret for how harshly he treated you. He could not bring himself to reach out while he lived, but he left you a portion of your inheritance with instructions that I should find you and ensure you received it. But more than that, Katherine, I want to rebuild the relationship we once had. I want to know about your life, your husband, and I have heard you have children. I want to be an aunt to these nieces and nephews I have never met. If you can find it in your heart to forgive my weakness, I would treasure the opportunity to be sisters again. With all my love and deepest regret, Margaret Katherine read the letter 3 times, emotions swirling through her that she could not quite name. Sadness for the parents who had died without reconciliation, relief that they had at least regretted their harshness. Cautious hope that perhaps she and Margaret could indeed rebuild what had been broken. She showed the letter to Yates that evening, and he read it carefully before handing it back. "What do you want to do?" "I want to write back. I want to tell her about our life here, about you and the children and the ranch. I want her to know that I am happy, that choosing my own path led me to something far better than what our parents had planned." Katherine looked at him. "Would you be willing to have her visit? Perhaps this summer, if she is able to travel. This is your home as much as mine, Katherine. You can invite anyone you wish. And I would like to meet this sister of yours, the one who apparently has regrets and wishes to make amends." Katherine wrote back that very night, a long letter describing the past 7 years. She wrote about the stagecoach ride that had brought her west, about the town's judgment and Yates's unexpected kindness. She wrote about falling in love and building a life together, about the ranch and the children and the contentment she had found in this harsh, beautiful landscape. She wrote honestly about the challenges and the hardships, but also about the joy and the fulfillment that came from building something real with her own hands. And she invited Margaret to visit that summer, to see for herself how well Catherine's defiant choice had turned out. Margaret arrived in August, stepping off the stagecoach in Winnemucca, looking overwhelmed and out of place in her fashionable traveling suit. Katherine, waiting with Yates and all 3 children, barely recognized the elegant woman her younger sister had become. But when their eyes met, something of the old bond sparked to life, and they embraced with tears streaming down both their faces. "Oh, Katherine," Margaret whispered, "I have missed you so much. I missed you too, every single day." The visit lasted 2 weeks, and Margaret threw herself into ranch life with an enthusiasm that surprised them all. She learned to milk the cow, helped Katherine in the garden, and played endlessly with the children who adored her immediately. She rode out with Yates to check fence lines, asked intelligent questions about cattle management, and proved to be far less fragile than her elegant appearance suggested. On the last evening before Margaret's departure, the 2 sisters sat on the porch while Yates put the children to bed. The sun was setting in its familiar glory, painting the sky in impossible colors. "I understand now why you fought so hard to choose your own path," Margaret said quietly. "I see what you have built here with Yates. The love between you is so obvious it practically radiates from both of you. And your children are healthy and happy and clearly adored. This life is real in a way that our Philadelphia existence never was." "Do you regret staying?" Katherine asked. "Sometimes. I married, as our parents wished, to a man of good family and substantial fortune. He is not unkind, but there is no passion, no partnership like what you have with Yates. We are polite strangers who share a house and a name." Margaret smiled sadly. "But I have made my choices, and I do not have your courage to unmake them. I will content myself with knowing that you found happiness, and with being part of your life again if you will allow it." "Always," Katherine said, taking her sister's hand. "You are always welcome here, Margaret. This is your family too, for as long as you want it." Margaret left the next day with promises to write regularly and return the following summer. Katherine waved goodbye to the departing stagecoach and turned to find Yates waiting, ready to drive her back to the ranch that had become so completely home. "Thank you for welcoming her," Katherine said as they rode. "I know it was an imposition having a house guest for 2 weeks. She is your sister, and she clearly loves you and regrets the lost years. That is worth accommodating." Yates glanced at her. "Did it make you homesick spending time with her? Did it make you wish you had stayed in Philadelphia?" "Not for a single moment. If anything, it made me more grateful for the life we have built. Margaret lives in a mansion with servants and every luxury, but she envies me. She envies the love and partnership we share, the sense of purpose in our work, the genuine connection we have with our children and our community." Katherine moved closer to Yates on the wagon seat. "I would not trade places with her for any amount of money or social standing. I have everything that matters right here." The years continued their steady march. The children grew and the ranch prospered, and Katherine and Yates grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. They added a 4th child, another daughter named Clara, in 1887. They survived droughts and harsh winters and market fluctuations, working together to keep the ranch viable through challenges that would have broken a weaker partnership. Thomas, their eldest, showed a talent for working with horses and a keen interest in the business side of ranching. Sarah inherited her mother's quick mind and her father's steady temperament. James was the dreamer, always asking questions about the wider world and reading every book he could get his hands on. And Clara was pure joy, a laughing child who brought sunshine into even the darkest days. Katherine taught all of them at home when they were small, and later they attended the school in Winnemucca. She remained involved in the community, serving on the school board and helping organize community events. The story of her arrival as a shunned mail-order bride had become almost a legend, a tale of perseverance and ultimate triumph that new settlers found inspiring. Yates remained the quiet, steady center of their family, working from dawn to dusk, but always making time for his wife and children. He taught the boys to ride and rope and mend fence. He taught the girls the same skills because, as he said, everyone who lived on a ranch needed to know ranch work regardless of gender. He read to them every evening and listened to their dreams and concerns with the same focused attention he had always given Katherine. And every night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, he and Katherine would sit together and talk about their day, their plans, their children's futures, and the life they continued to build together. Those quiet conversations, Katherine often thought, were the true foundation of their marriage. The physical love was wonderful, the partnership in work was essential, but it was these moments of simple connection that sustained them through everything. In 1890, 12 years after Katherine had stepped off that stagecoach into an uncertain future, they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. Margaret came west for the occasion, bringing her own children to meet their cousins for the first time. Sarah Pickering and her husband attended, along with Samuel Wright and his wife, and dozens of other friends and neighbors from Winnemucca and the surrounding ranches. As Katherine looked around at the crowd gathered at their ranch, at the children playing together and the adults laughing and sharing food, she thought about how impossible this scene would have seemed when she first arrived. She had been alone and judged and desperate, with no prospects and no allies, except the quiet cowboy who had offered her work when no one else would. Now she stood in the middle of a life she had built through determination and courage and love. She had a husband who respected her as an equal partner, children who were thriving, a home she had helped create with her own hands, and a community that valued her contributions. "Happy?" Yates asked, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of lemonade. Katherine took the offered glass and smiled at him. "So happy I sometimes fear it cannot be real." "It is real. You made it real by refusing to give up, by believing you deserved better than what you were offered." "We made it real," Katherine corrected. "You gave me the chance to prove myself when no one else would. You walked beside me and dared the town to judge. You showed me what real partnership looks like." She raised her glass in a toast to 12 years of marriage and a lifetime of love still ahead. "To the woman who had the courage to step off that stagecoach and the grace to give me a chance," Yates responded, touching his glass to hers. "I love you, Katherine Weston." "I love you too, Yates. Today, tomorrow, and always." They drank to each other and to the life they had built, surrounded by family and friends in the harsh, beautiful landscape that had become home. And Katherine thought that she had come west seeking escape, but she had found so much more. She had found herself, her strength, her purpose, and a love that had transformed her from a desperate mail-order bride into a woman who had helped build something lasting and true. The sun set behind the mountains in its familiar glory, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and purple and red. The party continued into the evening, lit by lanterns and firelight, filled with music and laughter and the sounds of community. And at the center of it all stood Katherine and Yates, hands clasped, hearts joined, looking toward a future they would face together as they had faced everything else. With courage, with love, and with the unshakable certainty that they belonged to each other, and to this wild, demanding, beautiful place they called home.